Visiting graveyards had always been a peculiar fascination of mine, even from a young age. The quiet, somber atmosphere, the old tombstones weathered by time, and the whispered stories of the dead had always held a strange allure. Little did I know that one evening, my morbid curiosity would lead me down a path I could never have imagined. It was an overcast evening in late autumn when the urge to visit a nearby cemetery struck. I decided to explore the historic Oakwood Cemetery, famous for its ornate gravestones and tales of restless spirits. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the uneven ground as I wandered through the maze of tombstones. As I navigated the labyrinthine pathways, the sense of solitude was both eerie and comforting. The only sounds were the distant hoots of an owl and the rustling leaves. My footsteps echoed through the stillness, each one a reminder of the living intruding upon the domain of the dead. I found myself drawn to an old gnarled tree that stood at the heart of the cemetery. Beneath its sprawling branches was a tombstone unlike the others. It was weathered, its inscription nearly illegible, but the name etched upon it was clear: Isabella Farrow, 1845-1875. Curiosity piqued, I began to clear away the overgrown grass and moss that obscured the stone. As I worked, I noticed a symbol etched beside the name, a symbol I couldn't identify. It resembled an intricate key with a skull at the center. Once the tombstone was revealed, a sense of unease settled over me. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched, that unseen eyes observed my every move. Nevertheless, my curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to explore the mystery further. Nearby, I discovered another tombstone with the same key-like symbol, this time marked with the name Henry Farrow, 1842-1876. It was clear that Isabella and Henry had a connection, but what that connection was remained shrouded in mystery. The air grew colder as I continued my search, and an inexplicable sense of foreboding hung in the atmosphere. I uncovered more tombstones with the same symbol, and each one bore the name of a member of the Farrow family. A sense of dread began to creep over me as I pieced together the tragic story of the Farrows. Isabella and Henry Farrow had been siblings, and they, along with their family, had perished in a terrible fire that had consumed their home in 1875. The incident was a local legend, a story of unimaginable horror, but the full truth of what happened had been lost to time. Suddenly, a low, mournful wail filled the air, sending shivers down my spine. I turned to see a woman standing beside the old tree, her eyes vacant, her clothes tattered and covered in soot. It was Isabella Farrow, her spectral form taking shape before me. I stumbled backward in horror, unable to comprehend the impossible sight. Isabella's lips moved, but her voice was barely a whisper as she spoke of the fire that had claimed her and her family. She spoke of a sinister entity, a malevolent force that had caused the flames to devour their home and their lives. It had been summoned by a cursed key, the very symbol etched on their tombstones. As Isabella's voice faded into the chilling wind, I felt a presence behind me. I turned to see a shadowy figure, the embodiment of the malevolent force that Isabella had described. Its eyes were pools of darkness, and its outstretched hand held a key with a skull at its center. With a sense of growing horror, I realized that this entity sought to claim me as its next victim, to add my name to the cursed tombstones. Panic surged through me as I fled from the sinister specter, the echoes of its unearthly laughter haunting my every step. My escape from Oakwood Cemetery was a blur, my heart pounding and my breath ragged. I could feel the entity's presence at my back, a malevolent force that sought to claim my soul. As I reached the cemetery gates, the wailing wind and the sinister laughter began to fade. I had managed to outrun the malevolent entity, but the memory of that night would forever haunt my dreams. The graveyard visit that had begun with morbid curiosity had led me to a terrifying encounter with the restless spirits of the Farrow family and a malevolent force beyond my comprehension. It was a night that would forever serve as a reminder of the horrifying secrets that lay hidden in the most peaceful of places. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie, silvery glow upon the gravestones of Greenwood Cemetery. The night was chilly, and a whispering breeze rustled the leaves, creating a symphony of unsettling sounds. My curiosity had driven me here, to this ancient burial ground that held more secrets than I could fathom. As I wandered among the tombstones, my flashlight's beam illuminated the names and dates etched into the cold stone. The silence was profound, the only company I had being the forgotten souls resting beneath the ground. I was drawn to a particularly old section of the cemetery, where the graves were overgrown with ivy and lichen, and the markers bore names lost to time. One tombstone in particular caught my attention. It was weathered and worn, but the name Evelyn Blackwood and the year 1825-1851 were still visible. There was an aura of sadness that clung to the grave, and I couldn't help but wonder about the life that had been lost so long ago. As I crouched to examine the grave more closely, a feeling of unease washed over me. It was as though the air had grown heavy, and I sensed a presence, a spectral observer to my midnight visit. The feeling intensified as I read a curious inscription at the base of the tombstone. "She wanders still." A shiver ran down my spine, and I was seized by an inexplicable compulsion to learn more about Evelyn Blackwood. The moonlight seemed to guide my steps as I ventured deeper into the cemetery. I could hear whispers on the wind, as though the night itself was guiding me toward the truth. It wasn't long before I discovered a crypt nestled beneath an ancient oak tree, its iron gate partially ajar. The name Blackwood was etched into the stone above the entrance. With a mixture of trepidation and curiosity, I pushed the gate open and descended into the crypt. The air within was dank and heavy, carrying the scent of decay and secrets long kept. The walls were lined with shelves of dusty tomes and tattered journals. It was a chilling library of the dead, chronicling the lives of the Blackwood family over generations. One journal stood out from the others, its pages filled with faded ink and the elegant handwriting of Evelyn Blackwood. As I read her words, I was drawn into a tale of a forbidden love that had torn her apart. She had fallen in love with a young man from a rival family, and their love had been a clandestine affair, hidden from the world. But the love had come at a terrible cost. The families had discovered the secret and had conspired to keep them apart. The young man had been murdered, and Evelyn had been confined to the crypt, imprisoned in death for her defiance. As I read the final entry, the crypt seemed to come alive. The whispering winds outside grew louder, and the temperature within the chamber dropped. I turned to leave, but the iron gate had swung shut, trapping me in the darkness. A mournful voice, ethereal and sorrowful, echoed through the crypt. It was the voice of Evelyn Blackwood, speaking of her love, her betrayal, and her eternal confinement. She had waited for someone to hear her story, and now, that someone was me. I could feel her presence growing stronger, her anguish and despair manifesting in a spectral form before me. Her hollow eyes stared into my soul, and I realized that I had unwittingly become a part of her tragic tale. Evelyn's spectral hand reached out, icy and insubstantial, and I could feel her grip on my arm. She was desperate to share her story, to have her love and betrayal acknowledged. I was filled with a sense of responsibility, the weight of her sorrow pressing down upon me. With her guidance, I began to read her story aloud, the words echoing through the crypt and into the night. As I reached the final entry, a sense of peace washed over me, and Evelyn's spectral form began to dissipate, her presence fading into the night. The iron gate swung open, and I emerged from the crypt, my heart heavy with the knowledge of the tragic love story that had unfolded within. The whispers on the wind had ceased, and the cemetery had returned to its silent slumber. As I made my way out of Greenwood Cemetery, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had played a part in setting Evelyn's spirit free. It was a visit that had begun with morbid curiosity and ended with a chilling encounter that I would carry with me for the rest of my days.